So visceral is almost like the kind of the multi-tracks have been torn away at that particular moment, and in a song that I think is in lots of ways, full of irony and full of various layers and perhaps a little bit of kind of self-mockery. It's a very straight moment.
Heavy riff that Johnny comes in on, which is kind of in line with the creep riff, where he's almost trying to destroy the song because he doesn't like it, trying to make it less soppy.
All of a sudden it kind of explodes and settles down on this particular chord sequence. The rain is falling down, and it's like this solitary individual in the middle of this kind of natural landscape.
I think it's middle section that Johnny Greenwood wrote with the mellotron, from Rain Down from a Great Height, I think is just, extraordinarily beautiful, is a brilliant contrast to the sort of grungier sections that kind of sandwich it.
Paranoid Android was released in May 1997, in the wake of New Labour's landslide victory in the national election. Despite being so long, the song was quickly adopted by radio stations across the country, and soon rose to number 3 in the UK charts.
Shocking record when that came out. As a single, it was 6 minutes plus. I mean, that was unheard of, from punk. The idea of doing a single that lasted for longer than 3 minutes was just a heresy. You just don't do that. That was what the old farts did, ELP, yes. They didn't even make singles, and it was just a territory that no one wanted to go near.
It set the level so high that this album's going to have to do something really special to stay at that particular pitch.
When the album was finally released on the 16th of June, the record's artwork was equally as remarkable as the first single had been.
I think there's a lot to be gained by attending to the artwork of this particular album. The idea of artworks being a particular aspect of rock albums goes back a long way, of course. I think it's very important. There are all sorts of little it's like little collages of images that are brought together. I said in the book that I think there's a small dissertation to be written on the colour blue itself in some of the artwork that you get with it.
The design of OK Computer and later Kid A, to a great extent, is very interesting. It's what probably people like Scritti Politti would have called mesthetics in some ways. There's this deliberate use of lowercase the whole time, which has become subsequently, and perhaps was at the time, a kind of sort of designery affectation that you'd get on the kind of logos of like offices in Old Street and places like that. But they use it in a kind of different kind of way, a more sort of pointedly sullen, deliberate sort of way. And they don't, and of course they also, their sleeves are sort of deliberate. There's lots of abrupt interventions and around and scribbles and scrawls, and the whole thing is deliberately kind of messed up and fucked up with and untidy.
It was pretty weird at the time. It didn't make any sense. There's nothing to latch onto. There are little tiny snippets to latch onto. It's like someone's taken an album cover and put it in the wash or something, and then it's come out sort of slightly blurred, slightly dyed. You recognise one thing, you recognise a sweet wrapper, you recognise the ingredients to a burger, you recognise some signs from an airport and a little family, the ideal family unit and all that. But it's all perverted, it's not as it should be, it's out of context. But like the way the lyrics work with the music, it becomes a sort of cohesive whole.
Actually, funnily enough, I think that the title OK Computer belongs as much to the artwork, really, as to something that pertains to the music itself.
A computer can't be okay. A computer can either be a 0 or a 1. It can't be a kind of moderate grey bit in the middle.
The album opened with the arresting guitar sound of Airbag, a song that reflected the band's new electronic influences, and more obscurely, Tom York's distaste for mechanised transport.
I just remember being so startled by it. It just seemed to take us into a new kind of era of rock. I mean, I remember people saying, this is the first 21st century album. I mean, it just didn't sound like anything, I'd ever heard before.
The band were quite keen to explore new music. They were obviously associated with DJ Shadow, and they've obviously grafted a little bit of that influence onto the track.
In some ways it mirrors Planet Telex from the previous album, which was again that dance meets rock kind of sound. Airbag was much more successful, I think.
You've got this kind of drum loop, this kind of sampling of a drum groove that Phil Selway played, which was then kind of used and looped in the track.
Airbag is, I think, the most uplifting Radiohead track in their whole canon, really. It's absolutely a burst of life, which is quite an achievement, because I think that's what they wanted to do. The lyrics concern themselves with the moment after a car crash, escaping a car crash, or being saved from a car crash.
Tom's paranoia about cars is perfectly expressed in that. And that's the subject he returns to throughout the album. But not just cars, but kind of modern transport, the kind of unease with being in metal boxes, being shunted along highways.
There's this wonderful "I'm back to save the universe" line, which is repeated, and that's, I guess, the sort of feeling that they're alluding to with escaping a car crash or being saved by an airbag. And the airbag is synonymous with that rescue, that sort of release from death.
Airbag is, yes, it's a curious introduction, and I think that it kind of sets the tone for the album, which is one of deep, deep sarcasm. In this case, to this kind of, ultimate sort of safety zone, this form of mechanistic convenience. And it's just one of the interesting general factors of OK Computer, that it's an album, if you think of like movements like punk and things like that, quite often that was a raw approach